Hello. Today I want to talk about seeking alpha and specifically an article I read of theirs involving Tesla. If you are a Tesla fan and you're on the forums and you're on the Facebook pages where people usually post news articles, keeping people updated about things going on with Tesla, you will eventually run into a seeking alpha article. Their articles tend to be negative, a little biased, and I usually don't read them. I pretty much stopped reading their articles a long time ago for that reason. It gets to a point where you can look at the headline of an article and you pretty much know immediately that it's a Seeking Alpha article just by how crazy it is and how negative it is towards Tesla. To give them credit, at the end of every story they write, they do admit that they are Tesla shorts, so they don't really have any motivation to write anything positive about Tesla. That being said, this particular headline, the title of the article, or whatever you want to call it, this one got my attention because it seemed like something you can't really be biased about. It just seems like it was going to be pure numbers and something that would be fun to read. The title is Tesla Model 3 costs more to charge than a gas car. Another reason I was intrigued by this one is that Tesla recently increased the price of the Superchargers. So I figured that would play some role in the article, and I hadn't really done any numbers since they changed the prices. So I wanted to see for myself. I will admit that I immediately started to lose confidence once I looked up the author of the story. His name is Anton Wallman. He has written great Tesla stories such as first drive of Jaguar's electric SUV. Will it unseat Tesla as a hot eco car? He did give Tesla credit as being a hot car, so that's not too bad. Another one, Alphabet's Waymo partners with Jaguar for level 5 driverless all-electric SUV, outgunning Tesla. Tesla investors should be concerned. Let's see another story. Lower cost than Tesla? VW's new battery cell costs under €100 per kilowatt hour. Tesla sales collapse in Europe, down 63% this quarter. Trouble for the $36,000 Model 3. Big delay revealed. And all of these articles were written in the last 2 months. Yeah, so the thing is, before I got my Tesla, I did a lot of numbers in comparing the price of gas and what my electricity bill would increase by, knowing the mileage that I drive every day. And I looked really closely at those numbers before I made the decision to pull the trigger. So when I read that headline that says the Model 3 would cost more to charge than a gas car, I'm thinking maybe I did something wrong. Because in all the numbers I did, I would have needed gas prices to pretty much plummet, or I would have needed a gas car with a really high miles per gallon number. I'm not going to read the whole article. We're just going to look at a couple things. He starts by saying the typical supercharger price is 24 cents per kilowatt hour, making the Model 3 6 cents per mile to operate. And the current average price of gas is $2.65 per gallon, making a 50 plus mile per gallon car 5 cents per mile to operate. So 1 cent per mile less than a Model 3. Now he's using 50 miles per gallon as a comparison, so it's without even knowing which cars he's using, you know it's a limited number of cars he can be picking from, because there aren't that many cars that get 50 miles per gallon, and a lot fewer that are the size of a Model 3. My other issue is him getting the 24 cents per kilowatt hour for supercharging. So these are the states that he used to get that 24 cents per kilowatt hour for supercharging. In the article, he makes it seem like he chose a good sample of states to get a good representation of the average supercharger price across the nation, but all he really did was choose all the states that charge per kilowatt hour and get an average of those. And I did the same thing, and I came up with 23 cents per kilowatt hour. And that isn't going to make that big of a difference. It might just be a rounding error on his part. It would still be more expensive using those numbers. With other superchargers, you don't pay per kilowatt hour, you pay per minute. and you get a significant discount at the per minute rate when you're charging below 60 kilowatt hours, and that averages out to be about 11 cents per minute. In the long range Model 3, a 60 kilowatt hour charge is good for 230 miles of range, and there are very few 230 mile gaps between superchargers in the United States. So there's no reason to ever really have to charge over 60 kilowatt hours and have to pay the higher 22 cents per minute average price for that level of charging. A couple days ago, I made some notes at my local supercharger to try to get an idea for how fast I would be charging, how much I would have to pay per minute, since that's something I never really looked at, and what I was adding to the car. Okay, so I just got to the supercharger. I have 33 miles of range right now. I want to see how much I can add in 30 minutes. The time is 12:16. Okay, so 12:26. 10 minutes in, that's 74 miles of range. Charging at 94 kilowatt. Okay, so 20 minutes in, I'm at 123 miles of range. The charging rate has dropped down to 78 kilowatts. So finally 30 minutes in, and we've reached 160 miles of charge. So is that about 120 miles of charge I added in 30 minutes? So now it's 12:59, 192 miles of range, and I've dropped down to 34 kilowatts of charging. So in 45 minutes, I added 159 miles of range. I went from 33 to 192. I charged from 13% to 79%. I had 9.4 kilowatt hours in the battery to begin with, and 57.35 kilowatt hours in the battery. So the entire charge, I was under 60 kilowatt hours. So it would have cost me $4.50 since I was there for 45 minutes. And in Louisiana, it's per minute. I also added 47 kilowatt hours in 45 minutes. That's important because it lets you know that the per minute charging more than likely will be a little more generous than the per kilowatt hour charging. If I had added 45 kilowatt hours in 45 minutes, it would have been the same. And with the supercharger expansion going into North Dakota and the southern border of Canada, those 230 mile gaps that do exist, they're going to be eliminated soon. So let's get back to the article and look at the cars he chose to compare to the Model 3. First of all the cars he chose are smaller than the Model 3. He chose the Prius when the Prius V would have probably been a better comparison just based on size. And you probably would have had to go up to the Prius V4 to get a more comparable car as far as options are concerned. But that one only gets 41 miles per gallon. He used a Honda as a comparison with the same issue. It was a smaller car. He also used a Honda Ioniq. That probably was the best comparison. But in reality, I wonder how many people are really cross-shopping these vehicles together. Then he goes on to talk about the range of the vehicles and the price of the vehicles, which really shouldn't have anything to do with the price of charging and fueling. He also makes this crazy assumption that EV owners charge exclusively at work, and Model 3 owners won't have that luxury. I think it's well documented that most EV owners charge at home. The Baton Rouge Supercharger is literally right down the street from my job, but for me it's more convenient to just go home and plug in and unplug when I'm ready to go in the morning. He also says most people don't have a garage or a parking space for charging, when the reality is that 7 out of 10 Americans live in a single-family home. And if you look at the people who are in the market for a car that starts at $35,000, probably an even higher percentage of those people will live in a single-family home. Not saying that some of them won't live in an apartment or have city parking where charging access is limited. I think he's exaggerating it by saying that most people won't have a way to charge. He then goes on to another old argument about how gas stations are more plentiful and you'd have to do a lot of thinking and planning when planning a trip with an electric vehicle. when the reality is that the GPS routes it all out for you. And it's hard to argue his point about gas stations being more plentiful, because normally you just say that you would charge at home, and he's completely dismissed home charging. He also describes a regular person as someone who would need to charge their electric vehicle through a card hanging out of a window. And I would probably say that that person isn't going to be in the market for an electric vehicle, so what's the point of making that assumption? See, then we go into a price comparison of a basically fully loaded Model 3, and we look at that compared to the base models of the other cars. That seems fair. Then he takes a shot at the Model 3's range from a car and driver review when they drove 75 miles per hour when it was 28 degrees, and the range wasn't as good as it was supposed to be. Shocking. I have driven gas cars before, and they also don't get great gas mileage when you're driving 75 miles per hour and it's below freezing. I don't get great gas mileage in this thing if I've tried to go 75 miles per hour and it was below freezing. He then starts to talk about the time it takes to charge and how it's faster to put gas in the car, which is obvious. But for me, charging at home, the only time I spend doing anything is the time I spend plugging the car in and when I wake up in the morning and I unplug the car. So it's about 3 seconds. 3 seconds or however long it takes that little light to turn white. He also doesn't mention any of the other level 2 chargers that are in places where you can do other things while the car is charging, and you won't necessarily be losing any time if you were planning on being there anyway. He then talks about the price of replacing the battery. The problem with what he does is he does this by using today's battery prices and applying them to the cost of a replacement battery 10 years from now. Reports were that Tesla was below $190 per kilowatt hour before the Gigafactory was producing cells. They expect to be below $100 per kilowatt hour by 2020. So maybe if you had to replace your battery in 10 years after you bought the car, if you bought it this year, that would be 2028. So even if Tesla is late on that time frame, like they are late on a lot of time frames, I don't think they're going to be off by 8 years. So I think it's fair to say that those battery prices will be under $100 per kilowatt hour unless something happens and alters the prices. Also, when talking about prices, he never at any point mentioned tax credits. So I guess the base of what he was trying to get at is taking a trip with a Model 3 would be more expensive than a gas car, or like one of these gas super efficient hybrids. But that doesn't pass the test either if you look at all the other states he didn't look at. He only looked at the states that's charged per kilowatt hour. If he would have looked at all the states instead of just the states that charge by kilowatt hour, he would have gotten a much lower number. So based on my charging, I think it's fair to assume that the per minute and per kilowatt hour price is going to be about the same. So the real average price of supercharging would be 15 cents per kilowatt hour, not 24 cents per kilowatt hour. And the average price per mile would be 3.75 cents per mile instead of 6 cents per mile. Even the super efficient 50 plus mile per gallon hybrids. So what his article should have been called is a Model 3 costs more to charge than a gas car if it's a super hybrid, and you only charge in these states, and you never charge at home, and you never use destination chargers, and you never use other types of chargers like ChargePoint. That's it, rant over.